everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Cities of Tomorrow. My name is Didem Erendil, and I hope you're all well and keeping safe in these extraordinary times. I'm the president for LSE Global Real Estate Group. The group is an international special interest alumni group, which we aim to foster business relationships among LSE alumni practicing real estate, and of course create discussions around a better and sustainable real estate as an asset class. Following our first event in February, this is our first webinar as a joint event with LSE Alumni Association London, and I'll be chairing this webinar together with Ken. And before I hand it to him, I would like to thank our speakers for accepting our invitation, and of course to LSE for their support. Ken?
Thanks very much, Didem. So hi everyone. My name's Kenneth Damien. I'm the chair of the LSE Alumni Association London, and we're very excited to be collaborating on this event with Greg. Thank you, Didem, for the collaboration and all the work we've put into this together. From the LSE AAL side, this is very much the start of a program of events centering around the impact of technology and technology-related trends on society as a whole. From a social sciences lens, and do stay posted for future events to come. Just in terms of the overall structure of today's event and a bit of housekeeping, we're going to start the first half with a general set of discussions co-hosted by myself and Didem, and then we're going to go into audience Q&A towards the end, which is going to be coordinated very kindly by Addy from Greg. So in terms of the Q&A, there should be Q&A functionality at the bottom of the Zoom invite, and you can ask questions on an ongoing basis, which Addy will then coordinate at the end. So that's it from me. Didem, back to you.
So to start, although it's really very difficult for all of us to see the full impacts of this global pandemic, one thing is clear, that the way we live, work, and travel, and therefore the cities of tomorrow, will be changing. So with this, I would like to turn to our speakers, and I would be glad if you could introduce yourselves very briefly and share your key predictions on the cities of tomorrow. Vanessa, shall we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Didem. Welcome, everyone. I am Vanessa Hale. I'm the Head of Insights and Residential Research for BNP Paribas Real Estate here in the UK, but I'm also the chair for the Urban Land Institute, the ULI in the UK. So I've got both hats on. Both are kind of macro viewpoints on where the world is headed. And obviously no one has a crystal ball with a clear answer. However, I have been referring to this as, I believe, us entering into the great acceleration and the changes that are going to be out of this for the impact into cities is going to be, I think, quite large. We will see the acceleration of what we were already seeing on the high streets. There will be retailers that will not return. But I think that lends itself to opportunities. I think the way that we have changed in our home life from dining and entertaining will change what we look for on our high streets when we come out of this, and the local element will come into play. And I think, and I know that we have other speakers on that will be more in depth on these conversations, but I think the movement of people and transport is going to dramatically change. I think the acceleration of autonomous movement will be huge. And I think our offices, I think all of us have been in some form or fashion working from home. And I think we're going to see a major restructure, not only in location of headquarters. I think it will align quite nicely to, ironically, the leveling up agenda that the government had set out pre-COVID. But I think that how we flex those offices and use them for different things will be interesting to see. And I think the last element is actually how we live in our homes. Everyone going through lockdown, and whether you're in a city or actually if you're in a more rural environment, the expectation of requirements within the home is going to dramatically shift. So I think kind of my cities of tomorrow is a lot of changing pieces to allow for us to maybe breathe, which probably also lends quite nicely to the fact that I think we all have a little bit more fresh air at the moment. So as a starting point for me.
Yeah, taking from the how we will use our offices. James, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. My name is James Pellatt. I'm Director of Workplace and Innovation at Great Portland Estates. We're a FTSE 250 real estate investment trust, and we are based purely in central London, and we have a focus on unlocking the potential of existing assets and realising their potential. I think the future of the city, I do agree with Vanessa. I think we're at this great acceleration. I think the key opportunity for us is something that Vanessa just touched on at the end, which was about air quality and the specification for offices. Central London office demand was driven largely by trying to copy New York real estate, and as a result, we spent a lot of time copying the specification of those offices. But if you look at the geography, New York is on the same line of latitude as Rome, and the humidity and weather conditions in New York are much more extreme than they are in London, and yet we spend a lot of time heating and cooling our buildings when the basic climate is actually pretty useful and pretty easy for us to use. But we've got into the sort of great race of consuming so much energy in real estate, and the real opportunity, I think, for the future of the city is as that cleaner transport comes into place, there's a greater opportunity to use natural ventilation. 83% of buildings that will exist in 2050 already exist today. And so that trying to understand how people use real estate and getting data to understand that is the great opportunity as we move forward.
Taking from the transportation angle, Matej, welcome.
Hello, Didem, and again, thank you very much for having me. First of all, my name is Matej Zakonjsek, and the main reason why I'm today on this panel is because for the last few years, I am co-creating, co-shaping transport policy of Europe. I was a Chief of Staff of the European Commissioner for Transport, and my predicament for the cities of the future, and specifically for the transport in those cities, is that the transport of the future will be clean, it will be connected, and it will be shared. This is something that I believe that we will all move our focus from transport, which is based on our needs and not on the type of transport as it's the focus today. So today we are focusing on planes, on trains, on cars, and now we will focus more and more on what transport needs we have. So in other words, we will be moving towards mobility as a service. So that means this shift from the personal owned models of transport towards mobility provided as a service. And of course, I'm very happy to go more in details about this in our further discussions.
Sorry, I had a small technical problem. Moving from Matej, Louise, welcome. We would be glad if you could introduce yourself briefly and have your key thoughts on the future of the cities.
Sure. Thank you and welcome everybody. My name is Louise Ellison. I'm the Group Head of Sustainability at Hammerson. We're a large property company focused very specifically currently on retail assets. We own large shopping centres across the UK and other European countries. I'm also the chair of the Sustainability Committee for the European Public Real Estate Association, and I chair an organisation called the Better Buildings Partnership. So yeah, very involved in all aspects of real estate sustainability. And I think what's been sort of said so far picks up on a number of those really kind of key elements that we're all sort of starting to expect to see. From our point of view, I think we will be expecting much greater diversity of use of the assets, the existing assets that we've got, and the building in of flexibility into the assets that we are currently designing and developing that we expect to be there for the next 50 or so years. So much greater diversity of use. We would be expecting city centres to the balance of uses, I think, to change quite a lot within city centres. And for there to be a more diverse range of groups within city centres that will require that flexibility of space. And I think what Matej was just saying about transport is very apposite. Transport will fundamentally change. We have focused a lot in the last sort of decades about how we get people around, and I think one of the things that's really been the major kind of revelation, if you like, from the past few weeks is that people don't really need to get around, they just need to be connected, exactly as we are connected now, and the massive improvement in productivity that you can get through that connectivity if you're connected properly. And I think that will place some quite significant requirements and demands in terms of investment in infrastructure in our cities, and also on power. It's been mentioned briefly, the necessity for clean power and clean transport. We are going to need our demand for electricity and power is going to continue to increase. We've all managed to cope with the current situation because we have that sustainable power that we can draw on, and we need to make sure that we can have more of that. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges for our cities, to be able to maintain and sustain the lifestyles that we're expecting, support that connectivity, the diversity of use, the demands that we will have on society and on each other, and do it with a clean and renewable power source that goes alongside it.
Thank you very much for the brief introduction. So I would like to maybe, Louise, continue with you. What kind of opportunities do you think this global pandemic provides us in terms of improving the real estate, and which can become a big part of the solution with regards to sustainability and climate change?
Well, I think there's a number of things that it's revealed. I mean, obviously, Vanessa referred to it as the Great Acceleration, and I think that is certainly what people and businesses are beginning to feel and beginning to see across our sector, that there is an opportunity here, and a necessity, even if you could put it as strongly as that. We are going to have to change the way in which we use our real estate and the way in which we think about real estate. So there is a necessity here to really kind of change the way we think about it, and that in itself presents an opportunity to do things in a much more connected and much more effective way. So James said the majority of the buildings that we will be occupying and using in 2050 are already built, the significant majority of them. So we need to be thinking much more cleverly and much more original thinking about how we use the existing buildings, how we refurbish them, how we change them, how we adapt them, and the way in which we occupy them, the time for which we occupy them. Our working practices are based on the Industrial Revolution and the purchase of a certain number of hours of people's days. And that has to change. There's been sort of gradual movements to agile working and these kinds of things, and greater flexibility and discussions about work-life balance, which have been going on for the whole of my working life, which is sort of quite a long time, really, longer than it would appear from the picture that I've given you to put on the front sheet for this. But anyway, so we have to change the way we think about that, and I think that's that opportunity that has been presented through the current crisis is huge, because suddenly you see that actually you don't need to be, as I said, you don't need to be in the same room. You can work from anywhere. So that's enormous. And I think it's also given us a taste of the prize, or a little bit of a sight of the prize in terms of carbon emissions and climate change, because there has been such a dramatic drop. Suddenly we can see actually that it really does make an enormous difference if you fly less and if we drive less. The cities, you've seen the pictures from around the world of cities where smog is lifted, air quality is exponentially better over a relatively short period of time. We can make those changes. So suddenly you see the prize, and I think there will be quite a lot of unhappiness if we then just move straight back to a business as usual working environment. It's going to take a little bit of time in order to get to a situation or get to a level of development in the economy where we can really capitalize upon the changes that we're currently seeing, because it's going to require a lot of investment. But we need to be making sure that that investment goes in the right direction, and we really are supporting the transition to a low carbon and clean economy, and that requires the investment in the transport infrastructure that Matej has been talking about, and a real kind of rapid investment of that, and expectation that we move away from internal combustion engines relatively quickly, and we really start kind of ramping this kind of thing up, and incentives set out for business to make sure that they do move in that direction. There's a huge opportunity with the bailouts and the government support that's going into business now, and we need to make sure that that comes with an expectation that those businesses perform in a different way from how they have before, because we can do it. We're we're clever. One of the things about the real estate sector is it's got a huge amount of technical experience and knowledge and creativity within it. We do have magnificent solutions, but we need to put our minds to it, and we need to put the money behind it. So it's a huge opportunity that's come from this, but we need to capture it.
Just to draw up on that, Louise, in relation to the thesis that you outlined there, would you say that in some sense would be a very European or UK-centric model, or that there are lessons to be learned for other sections of the globe, and particularly in relation to sustainability and climate change? I'm going to butcher the statistic, but it's somewhere in the ballpark. I read somewhere that China has poured an analogous amount of cement in the first 10 years of this decade as the US did in the previous 100. And many of these solutions are going to require multilateral kind of action. But it would seem to me that the private real estate investment thesis is by definition a little bit siloed. Or do you see it as a wider kind of, is there a wider and more applicable model that can be leveraged here?
I think it's definitely not just a UK or European thesis. This has to be, I mean, it is global, because the climate change issue is global, and what we are seeing in terms of the prize that's on offer is very much a global prize. So the pictures are from all around the world. When you talk about China, yes, I'm sure the statistics are somewhere around that. There's been such a rapid acceleration and change in that economy, and that's not just because there's a kind of willful sort of desire to pour concrete, but there has been a speed of economic transition for all sorts of reasons that has led to that happening. There has also been in China a massive transformation of the renewable energy sector that's come out of their investment. The Chinese economy is an impressive one, but they are very aware of the challenges that climate change presents for that economy. And simply for the availability of water to their population, apart from anything else. So there is a real, I think, desire there, and we've seen it kind of emerging to make sure that there is international action and reduction of carbon emissions. So they are, when sort of people say, oh well, there's no point in me doing anything about kind of about my carbon footprint because China's not doing anything about theirs. Oh boy, are they well on this journey and doing a lot of really exciting stuff. You know, we as a sector, the real estate sector has challenges, and yes, you could describe as siloed. You can also describe as completely, it's very fragmented, and that is quite a UK kind of trend, if you like. We fragmented our sector so that it does make it quite difficult for the different elements within the sector to actually work together in order to come up with the best solutions for those buildings. And I think James would probably be able to talk more eloquently than I can about the way in which the development of buildings has been set up so that it's difficult to have conversations with your contractor when you're in the process of designing a building. So I think there's a lot that we could do around that. But yeah, I think there is a there's certainly a mood within the public for greater collaboration. I'm not sure that we've been particularly brilliantly served by our leadership over the last few weeks in terms of demonstrating global collaboration and global sort of joined up thinking about some of this. And I think there's an expectation that is going to have to change. But yeah, there's a big prize, and it's definitely a global one. And there are a number of, those big players are very much, I think, up to, wanting to make this happen.
Sure. So James, over to you.
Sorry, I teed you up for that then, James. I hope you're ready for it.
I was intending on bringing you in anyway, James, so you can't blame Louise for that. So a general kind of starter, which I'm hoping you can weave into the narrative that we've kind of got going, which is that I think generally a lot of people are curious whether the kind of the working from home new status quo is going to become a permanent fixture, and if so, to what extent? What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think that could affect things from a real estate perspective, both in terms of occupancy, employers' habits in relation to the same, and kind of related issues?
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting insight at the moment, and I think there's a danger of applying the current situation and extrapolating it wholesale throughout the future. I think there's glimpses of the future that we can see, and as Louise said, I think, I've had the ability to work from home for well over 2 years. Everybody in GP does. And at the moment, I think the key thing to remember is that we're all going through the same experience. That will shift once some people are in the workplace and some people aren't, because I think that just that very nature, the communication, productivity is improved, but communication, I think, is starting to decline 10 weeks into this point. Particularly if you're relying on email, or there was a fascinating article in The Economist about why Zoom is so tiring, and splitting the audio and the video it plays tricks with the brain only by milliseconds, but it's enough to cause these problems. And I think that we thrive on that human experience. But what it means is that if you create space, doesn't matter, actually, just ignoring if it's an office, but if you create any space that people want to congregate and be together in a COVID managed world, so this is one that bears some resemblance to what we had before, I think people want to be in those spaces because ultimately we are social animals. I think it's interesting that even Facebook, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, and there's lots of commentary about it, but pay is going to scale downwards. So, well, thinking if you're living in Idaho but you're working for Facebook, then actually you're getting no benefits. I mean, they used to give you everything for free to keep you in the office, to keep you working there in an urban experience. They had a every employee at Facebook has they have a Facebook BFF, right? And you were able to expense going out to the value of something like £30 a head to join in and make friends with other people. That's not a coincidence. Trying to keep that community together was there because you're trying to improve that collaboration. And I think the same thing will apply, just that there will be choice. I think Vanessa, and perhaps Vanessa will touch on this later, but that point about leveling up, I think if you can live in Manchester or Lyon or any other sort of city across Europe and have a better experience and still do that work, but still able to reach a headquarters once, twice, 3 times, 4 times a month, then that headquarters experience has to be the best it can be, because that's the bit that cements the communication. That's the bit that allows working from home to happen. If you're just working from home, and some people are and some people aren't, then I think the insecurities that we all experience in work will really bear out. So I think there's a slight note of caution of just extrapolating today what will happen forever.
I want to ask Vanessa here, because since we're talking about working from home a lot, And you mentioned that there will be significant changes in the residential market as well. So what are we leaving behind for, especially for residential? For example, can we sell properties without a balcony going forward?
Yeah, no, you saw the whole virtual way of technology and doing, showing homes and all that will continue to accelerate. It will become part and parcel of doing any sort of exchange of housing, especially I think it's been highlighted in this period of time. It's interesting, I think the dramatic things that you're starting to see, there's a lot of people questioning the concept of open plan in the house. Which I think is a fundamental. But because I agree with James, I think that this whole element of working from home, you still need to have that interaction with colleagues and being able to access that. I think the tenants of office buildings, i.e. the companies, will be the ones that will have to make sure that there's a reason to go to the office. I think most people today are, companies are probably starting to at least ask their employees, do you have an interest in coming back? If so, how frequently? Because the flip of that is also, we also want to make sure if we're going to start moving into this more flexible type of working arrangement, we want to make sure that whilst the last anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, depending on your industry, you have been forced to work from home. You may not have the right setup. You might not have a home office. You might not have the right desks or chair. I can tell you I worked off an ironing board for my first 2 weeks of working from home because I'd moved house. To the reality of actually we need to facilitate that being productive if you're going to work from home as well as going into an office. And I saw somebody asked a question, do we have the ability, does it mean that we can work from home wherever that home might be? And I think that that's the part that companies are going to have to start adjusting to those timescales and thinking through fundamentally, what's adaptable and where they're willing to flex. And I think it's going to be a real selling point. I had the privilege of doing a webinar a few weeks ago with Sir Stuart Lipton, and he was talking about the fact of whether or not offices will be free range or factory, and kind of starting to think about it in that sense and going, well, actually, do I want to work for an organization that's going to expect me to be in an office every day, or will they give me that freedom, and which one will I be more productive in? It was an interesting concept that I can't claim any credit for, but it definitely started my brain thinking.
So Matej, how do we see the future of transport in this whole discussion? How are you going to take us from home to work from now on?
Well, maybe from the bedroom to the living room and back. No, it's, of course, the transport will stay, but it will, like many speakers already mentioned, it will change, and it will change radically, and it is already changing radically. And this crisis has just, like many others already mentioned, accelerated the moves. And at the same time, on the positive side, if we see what's happening, we have a reduction of driving for obvious reasons, but on the positive side, we have a huge uptake of, first of all, walking as well as cycling. So a lot of people are experiencing for perhaps the first time what cycling means in London, what cycling means in other big cities around the world, and that it is possible actually to cycle. And we know that, for example, in the UK, 58% of the car journeys are less than 5 kilometers long. So that gives a huge opportunity for other means of transport or even walking, because these are all these opportunities. And of course, on the threat side of it, we also can have increased use of car if the people are afraid of using public transport due to the health issues. So here is a really big opportunity, and the big opportunity comes specifically for the policymakers and the government, and while we were all busy with baking bread and yoga lessons and so on in the last few weeks, a lot of our public employees were actually working on creating new cycling lanes in the cities. So many, many more kilometers of cycling lanes were created. Many more pedestrian walks were created. And this is the new opportunity. And this is the opportunity that we have in order to create different cities. Because if we do not have an infrastructure, no matter how much our mindset might change, without a proper policy and without a proper infrastructure, this will just remain a potential. And potential without realization will forever stay only a potential, and it will be actually a source of frustration. So I do believe that this is a great opportunity that we can move in. And at the same time, transport will be moved into service. So if I can draw the comparison with the phone today, the calling function of the phone is only one of the functions of the phone. And it's probably the one which we use the least during the everyday interactions that we have with the phone. So in the future, this might happen, and this is already happening with transport, where the transport will become service as such, and it will be based on your needs. And you will get a transport or mobility package, which you will be able to or hire, or to pay as you go, or to have a yearly or monthly subscription. And it will be a mix of different transport modes based on your personal needs, based on your needs that, for example, you don't like walking, you don't like to have a car, you don't like to own a car, and you would like to have a shared car, or you need 2 plane tickets, or you need a fast train tickets 5 times a year, and so on. And all that will be able to be put together, and you will be paying for mobility as a service. And the new companies of the future are the ones which will be able to understand that and will be offering that mobility, that service to the customers. So that's why you can see a huge move into the transport sector of the companies such as Google, Apple, and all the things, because they saw that there is a great opportunity together with the data that actually this happens. So I believe that this connectivity of 3 sectors together, transport, energy, as well as people-to-people contacts, I think these 3 sectors will be the one which will determine the future. And now, if I just also comment on your question regarding, what is, because here we are having also the real estate talk, how I believe what's the transport angle in that. I also believe that, of course, the new questions which will be raised when the people will be looking for offices or new homes are also the questions such as how many electric charging stations there are in the office. Is there an electric charging station at home? Can I walk to work? Can I cycle? Is there a cycling lane near my new office or my home? Is there, so all these are new questions which we will need to ask, because these are the cities of the future. And, another example of this is that, in the past, the car was a symbol of freedom. Owning a car means that you were able actually to move beyond your 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, village, city, and so on. But if you consider that today, the average driver in the UK spends 4 days per year only looking for a parking spot, so that is not a freedom anymore. That is actually very opposite to freedom. And see that not owning a car, but being able to have the mobility is the new sense of freedom.
So just to follow up on that, Matej, that very, very fascinating analogy, by the way. So transport as a service. In terms of, so within the context of the city of the future, do you see our consumption of that service as being primarily private, public? Is it going to be provided from a state, on the basis of your identification as a citizen by the state? Is it going to be wrapped up in some kind of employment package? Any kind of thoughts on that? And I'd be amiss if I didn't ask you to wrap into your answer some reference to flying cars. That would be greatly appreciated, as I'm sure it's on everyone's mind.
Well, I think that first of all, on your first question, I don't believe that definitely I don't believe that personal cars will disappear, but I do believe that owning a car and having a trip that you want should be your wish to have an experience of driving a car. So you might have an old timer at home, which on the weekend you want to drive on a, beautiful country road. But it should be not based on, it will be based on your wish, not by your limitations of having only that option. So you will be able to have a mix of mobility services, which will be all wrapped into your, and then your mobility provider should be able to give you the mobility mix that fits not only your possibilities and your wishes. So everybody should have in the future mobility mix which fits their needs. So and you know, so many times you can see that this is already happening, where we are combining different mobility services, you know. But of course we can do that only if we have ability to do so, only if there is a public transport, only if there are cycling lanes, only if there is also data which is shared among different transport modes and are integrated in one platform or several platforms, but in a platform that can tell you, okay, today my aim is to go as fast as possible from this point to this point. What is there? And that service provider should tell you, you should perhaps walk for a kilometer, then you take a tube or a metro for 5 stations, and then there is a cycling, shared cycling scheme, and you go and cycle for, I don't know, 2 kilometers. And this is the fastest way. Or if you have some limitations, you should be able to adjust that based on your limitations or your wishes. And this freedom to choose what you actually want to do, and that you're not limited by your own limitations, such as my car, where do I need to park? How do I need to park? You know, is there a train? Is there not a train? This is really the sense of freedom that we are coming. And now, of course, I will not let you without the answers on the flying cars. I think this is already a reality. We are, of course, it's not perhaps in the view of kind of Flintstones versus the Jetsons of today, but perhaps more that what you see today in the shape of drones. You already have delivery drones, you have drones doing different services and so on. We are one step forward already when we are looking for the personalized passengers drones, and we are already having some prototypes which are being tested as we speak. But of course, for that again, and you know, the date for that, because everybody wants to know the date, I understand that Porsche and Boeing are already estimating that we will see the passenger drone market around the year 2025. But of course, for all that to happen, again, we need a legislation. We need you know, the entire conditions to be made. And I know that European Commission is already developing so-called urban aviation airspace model, which is the airspace which is under where the passengers, passenger jets are currently traveling. So that airspace, which will be defined how you can actually use that new service. But this is not a future anymore. This is already a reality.
Thank you very much, Matej. I think we're going to go to Q&A in a second, everyone. But I think I'd just like to give you all a moment to make some closing comments. And I think what would be interesting is, along with, you know, generally anything that you'd like to address in terms of what we've been discussing, be really curious to hear what you think of is the future relationship between state and private actors within some of the trends that we've been discussing. So Vanessa, would you like to kick off on that note?
Sure. Nice big chunky one. I think that without question, the public-private partnerships will become more of the norm. I'd like to think that, at least. I think there's a realization that all parties have to work together. There's tons of questions that are coming through. And you can see that there's regulation or policies that are in place that have had to adjust. You know, perfect example, throughout the COVID crisis here in the UK, the planning departments had to adjust to having virtual planning meetings, which when our planning system was put in place, you know, the concept of technology was out the window. So actually having to adjust to that and recognizing that, you know, things have changed and moved on is just one small, I think, trigger. I think everyone is collectively looking at it and going, look, we need to muck in together to get this done. I'd like to think that we will see more public-private partnerships taking place as we go forward. And I think I'm quite excited by the flying cars. I think there's a whole urban mobility space. It does present some challenges, and I think you know, Louise and James both talking to reality of, you know, the buildings that we have today are probably the ones that we will still have in 2050, but there are challenges because that means there will be a ceiling as to how high you can go on buildings, and actually we could end up with a much more sprawled type of city scenario in places where you don't think at the moment might be epicenters for urban air. But if we have this ability to be more flexible in where we live and work, cities that maybe aren't as high on the big six agenda for the UK, or major metropolitan areas, could all of a sudden be really impacted and then not be able to facilitate. So I think there's a challenge that we have to think about for that.
Sure. And on that note, James, so within the context of kind of state and private enterprise collaborations, also interested to kind of hear your thoughts specifically on whether there could be a tension there in terms of using existing building stock versus building new, but generally interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think one thing we haven't really mentioned, and it's easy to sit in a bubble and think about cities, is that we haven't really discussed the social value and trying to benefit the whole city. I think without question, in order to trying to achieve a planning consent is really, really hard. And quite rightly, we have to demonstrate a credible track record for the social agenda and about how we can improve the social mobility of the entire city. One of the problems I have with flying drones, passenger drones, is that they are, I mean, I think there's all sorts of issues with them, but they're elitist, right? So your very core existence as a human being, if you're seeing someone flying above you and looking down on you, is affected if there's no hope of you even getting close to that. And I think we've got to be careful about the city of the future. We have to consider the air quality and the education for everybody in that city. Otherwise, we're going to easily create this dystopian future. And how we knit those things together are being driven by public-private partnerships, because we can't even get our foot in the door unless we've got a credible track record and a credible story to tell. And I think that challenge between existing buildings and new buildings, existing buildings are so inefficient, and the amount of data, Louise probably come on to say this, but she's also a member of the Better Buildings Company, which is to look at existing buildings. People assume that a new building is efficient. It isn't. It is incredibly inefficient. Most of your offices are only occupied around 40 or 50% of the time. And although your EPC rating may be A or B, actually the energy you consume is much, much worse. And we need to get that shift through into the consumer. And by the consumer, I mean office occupiers and the pension funds that buy buildings. Once we unlock that and we get some clearly demonstrated data, and I do definitely agree with Matej on that point about how to share data, once we understand how those things are used, then I think we can go on to improve that experience for the entire city and not just for a few people.
Thanks very much, James. So, Louise, I think the relationship between state and private actors probably lends itself quite easily to the topic of sustainability. But yeah, definitely interested to hear your thoughts on that, and generally what we've discussed overall.
Yes, I mean, I think the role of the public sector is the one that you have to sort of think through quite carefully, because when the public sector steps in and starts trying to change or influence the way a market operates in being kind of getting too specific about it, then it tends not to work particularly well. Where the public sector sets an expectation and polices that expectation, the private sector will respond effectively. You know, if you set as regulations, we will find a way of delivering against those regulations. One of the things that we talk about a lot at the moment within the Better Buildings Partnership and elsewhere is designing for performance. There's a big project called Design for Performance, and this is exactly what James was just talking about. Buildings now are designed, they're not designed to perform, they're designed to comply with a set of standards. But if you actually change, if you flip that and you say, well, your building is going to have to be, you know, not just the day you hand it over, but in 2 years' time, it's going to have have to demonstrably perform properly for whoever is occupying it. That's a very different mindset for the design teams and the project management teams who are putting your building together. And it provides a much, much better product. I mean, the fact that we don't do that, you would never expect to hand over money for a fridge freezer or a car or a pair of shoes, and at the end of the day, and just simply not perform in the way that it's said on the tin. But that's what we do with buildings all the time. And it's the same with residential as well, I might add. You know, if you buy an off-plan or a new build residential building, we've seen the catalogue of horror stories of people just not getting what they expected, and the awfulness that goes with that. So we have a lot to do as a sector to improve the quality of our products, and then to get it to the stage where it actually is a product that is designed for the future and designed to be able to withstand the climate change and the things that are heading towards us. The investment community, on the flip side, also has a massive role to play. You know, harking back to the beginning of this conversation where we were talking about, you know, global shift, the investors tend to be global players. And they are very, very aware of the risks they are exposed to across their real estate portfolios and all of their other portfolios, but particularly those physical assets, the real assets that they've got that they can't move if those assets happen to be in somewhere that is going to be subject to massive overheating, or to forest fires or bushfires or to huge rainfall events. So they're very aware of the impacts that climate change is going to have, and are trying to make sure that they are adapted. Those buildings are adapted, their portfolios are resilient, and that those buildings are being adapted in order to reduce their impact, the impact those buildings themselves are having on climate change. So there's an expectation that the public sector needs to set the agenda and to know how to interact and to know how the market works. Because I often in my dealings if I'm deal with government and with policymakers, there is a naivety about particularly the commercial real estate sector and the commercial investment sector, how that sector works, where the decision drivers are, and where you need to intervene and how you need to intervene. It's set up very differently from the construction sector and in many ways from the house building sector, where the risk lies and how do you get people to change. So I think there needs to be a greater sophistication of understanding of the sector itself, and the way in which the public sector can actually play its part. And then the policing element is incredibly important. Making sure that actually the sector is delivering what it's expected to. And I think Didem alluded earlier to whether or not we would be able to sell buildings sell flats without balconies. And I think it goes to a very important wider point about how we use the space that we've got. If we, you know, certainly in London and most, I think, major UK cities, the flats that get built now tend to be 1 bedroom with open plan kitchen or 2 bedroom with open plan kitchen living space. That just doesn't work if you are, you know, 2 couples sharing a flat at the moment, all trying to work from home. Completely impossible. So what does that do to our space ratios? You know, all of those things are going to be quite complicated and it's the same with offices. As we go back into the offices, if we are separating, if we're using them differently, do the space ratios change? Because if they change fundamentally, and they're likely to, that has an impact on the value of the assets and how much land we've got and what we can pack into them. So some really complicated challenges for our sector to start dealing with. A lot of those other things, you know, we are already looking at how, you know, where we can charge vehicles from, how we work with transport as a service and mobility as a service. All of these things are absolutely current and are really going on in those design team meetings, and in those kind of those more thoughtful businesses are thinking absolutely about how we deliver this stuff, because we are looking at delivering the buildings that are going to be there for a long time. So yeah, very interesting, challenging times for the sector for sure, but one that is very much being driven certainly by the private sector investment community, and there is an expectation, I think, that the public sector starts stepping up and setting some real standards that actually work with our sector in order for them to be really effective.
Right. Thank you very much, Louise. I'm just conscious of time, and we're very keen to get on to Q&A. So, Matej, if you could wrap perhaps your kind of closing thoughts into responses to the questions, that'd be great. We're going to hand over now to Adi to coordinate audience Q&As to the panel. So Adi, over to you.
Thanks, Kenneth. As a quick introduction, I'm Adi Gokal. I've recently joined the LSE.
I think there's a lot of, sorry, Adi, I think there's a lot of feedback. So do you just want to?
Yeah, okay. Is that better? I've just turned off my video.
Yeah, it's a bit better.
Okay, so just as a quick introduction, I recently joined the LSE GREG committee. I work in corporate finance at Great Portland Estates, and I primarily take care of the debt book at GPE. And we've had some really interesting questions through, actually. A lot of them are themed based on the death of the office. And some of the key questions here are, how will COVID and working from home really affect values going forwards and rental levels? And really, what will happen to flexible offices as well going forwards? Vanessa, can we start with you?
Yeah, there is a bunch of questions. So I don't think there's a death of the office. I hope that has come through in my comments. I think we still will have a requirement and need for offices. James will be delighted to hear. But I also think that it's interesting. There's been a lot of big corporates who have come out and said, you know, Facebook, Twitter, a variety of different global banks, oh, well, we don't need offices. I'm going to focus attention on staffing and all those sorts of things. But I think the human behavior side, we will still need offices. And as Louise alluded to, with the space ratios potentially being dramatically changed to adhere to more social distant measurements, I think actually the requirement for offices could become larger, which sounds slightly counterintuitive to what you would expect, but they may be larger and spread out over a variety of different places, whereas before they might have taken a huge building. They may only take 3 floors within a building to be able to service a certain percentage of staff, but actually they're also going to take 3 floors in another city and 3 floors in another city and 3 floors in another city. And so overall their rents will probably, I would think, balance out across the time frame, because they'll be possibly paying a little bit less, but B, taking more space spread out across multiple cities to service that space ratio that may be required. Just my view.
Thanks. And a specific one that's come in for James. Are there any specific innovations that GP is pushing through as a result of C19 with a view to a new permanent normal as opposed to a short-term measure? And it will also be interesting to hear how data is being used. You mentioned data in your introduction, and whether we'll be able to monetize data going forwards.
Well, that's a great question. So yes, there are innovations that we're already using. We were the first central real estate investment trust in Europe, certainly, to roll out a workplace experience app across all of our portfolio. So that gave people control over their lighting and heating. That same workplace app, we are adapting so that it has enhanced touch-free access in and out of the building. It will also allow you for touch-free photocopying, anything that really where you interface with somebody else. We are looking at that. We'd already tested this young startup in Finland called 720 Degrees, which measures the air quality within our workplace. That was in a trial which will roll out further, because again, you need to convince people that the air they're breathing is going to be really important. And also, I think just some simple things, and the key innovations are around, I think the one thing that will really shift is that time at which you need to be in the office. So the commute to get everybody to the same place at 9 o'clock, I think, will become more spread out, partly through choice, because humans will want to. And so real-time data about how the city is moving, integrated with some sort of platform, I think really useful. I also think that point about data is not so much that we will monetize data, because that means that we're deliberately trying to acquire it for that reason. What we're really trying to do is enhance the experience, because if you can enhance the experience, then you're more likely to stay in that space, and the effort for moving is going to be really hard. Because let's face it, real estate is still only 5%, or between 5 and 10% of their head office cost. The biggest cost is headcount and people. So you don't save that much by wiping out your office completely.
Thanks. And leading on to that, Louise, how important is data for your role, especially going forwards?
Oh, it's all about data. I mean, my role, particularly because we are so focused in sustainability on environmental performance, that we have to have the data. And we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate at Hammerson. We have a very sort of comprehensive environmental data management system, but you can't really improve the operating efficiency of your assets unless you understand where they are already, and that means getting real kind of detail in the data. I've spent most of today just sort of downloading data for the last kind of 10 weeks and updating our daily energy data across our assets to make sure that we are kind of reducing them as far as we possibly can. It's impossible to do it without it. So we have to get much better at it. That we've seen a huge shift in the last 10 years, I would say, in terms of environmental data, particularly as investors are expecting it and are acquiring it, so that it's got much better. It's still not there yet, it's not as strong and not as reliable and robust across the sector as it needs to be, but it's certainly getting a lot better. So yeah, we're certainly moving in the right direction. I was just sort of flicking through the questions, and there was a question about the about how the high street is going to change in changing times, and because I think Vanessa and I had alluded to changing times, and I think that kind of relates back to what James was saying, the way in which we use the space at the times at which we use the space. And I think as we get more diversity within our city centres, and we get different groups of populations and different demographics in the city centres, it simply means that we will be working at different times. Our day will be structured differently, so there will be different uses and things that we need across that high street, whether that's greater healthcare, whether that's greater social uses, whether that's spaces where we can connect. I think those spaces, that the public realm, how we use the public realm, and how that is how much space is dedicated to that, culture and the arts, bringing those in. How we actually, all of those, I think, will change in terms of how we see our city centres going forward.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. And Matej, we've spoken a fair bit about sustainability, and it's obviously key for real estate going forward. How important is sustainability in transport, and how much time do you spend looking at that balance between emissions and being sustainable regarding transport?
Well, I think there is absolutely no question about this. Sustainability is the key word for transport, and we will all, not only transport, but only as a people, we will be able to have a bright future only if in all of our work, being transport, being real estate, or anything else, agriculture, energy, you name it, if we do not take sustainability into account. And when I talk about sustainability, I am talking about sustainability with a big S. Sustainability when it comes to everything from, on one hand, environmental standards, but also social sustainability, that people feel connected, that they actually feel involved. So sustainability in financial terms, that we are not too much in debt and so on. So sustainability is really a key word of going forward. And you know, we were before discussing about the various different challenges, and indeed, that brings me also to what James has mentioned before. If we do not include everybody, and that everybody actually feels that they are part of the story of the development, of development, then we are missing out, and we are not serving the people. And in the end, this will come to bite us. So I can give a good example from transport with the mobility as a service. we see that cities, specifically city centers, are being reclaimed back to the pedestrians, to the cyclists, and so on. But then always the question is, what happens with the parking spaces that are that we do not need anymore? Parking spaces then suddenly become the most valuable real estate. But what do we do with these parking spaces? Do we convert them into a new shopping mall, or do we convert them into the park for public? So these are the questions we will need to ask all of us when we go forward, in order for everybody to really feel part of the future that we are in. And I think that this is really a key question.
Thank you. From me, I'd just like to thank all the panelists. It's been fascinating hearing your thoughts over the past hour. I'd like to hand back now to Kenneth and Didem for some concluding remarks.
We would like to thank everyone, especially our speakers, for their valuable time. I personally enjoyed the discussions a lot, and my key take on from this is adaptability, connectivity, air quality, and design to perform, which I'm sure we can do more of these webinars on any of these key topics. And I would like to thank every attendee. We had around 80 people attended our webinar today. So I'll hand over to Kenneth and hope to stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely seconded from my side. And yeah, generally, all the topics being discussed were very, very interesting, but I thought it was lovely to see the amount of overlap and cross-pollination between some of the ideas, suggestions, and issues being discussed. So sincere thanks to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who attended. And really appreciate everyone making this such a great event. I think we'll wrap up there. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.